Good morning, dear friends. It's a rainy day today, and that's why I'm really happy to welcome you at this dialogue of our leadership dialogue. And we have a very active program today. So while our international guests are getting to know how to use the equipment, I'd love to say a couple of words that our forum has been held since 2015, and we choose different subjects for our forums. Today, our forum is about reputation, corporate, international, and public reputation of brands and trademarks. So we're going to discuss different issues related to reputation. And what is reputation tomorrow? This is our key question. I'll be happy to introduce Paul Holmes shortly. He is the founder of the Holmes Report, which is the most important mass media resource about PR and communications. He's a fantastic speaker, and he's going to share a very interesting story with us about what we can expect in terms of reputation. And I would like to thank all the co-organizers of our Leadership Dialogue Forum. We prepared it together with RSPP, which is the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs, and PRCA, and Francis Ingham, who is the head of RPCA, is going to talk today as well. It's his first visit to Russia, and I'm sure that we will welcome him warmly. So it's going to be a really interesting day today. Let's welcome Paul Holmes.
I'm not sure they're ready for me yet. So, we're good? Thank you. Hi. It is wonderful to be back in Moscow. Thank you very much for the invitation once again. As in previous years, I have to apologize for the fact that I can't even begin to address the audience in its native language. We English are so famous for our language skills that I am considered bilingual because I can speak both English and American. Beyond that, I am completely lost. So I'm delighted to be here, first of all, because it's Moscow. Second of all, because I think this is a fascinating topic and a particularly timely topic. And what I didn't know when I accepted the invitation to join you today was just how timely this was going to be. Because as many of you will be aware, the Business Roundtable, the group that that represents CEOs in the United States and addresses issues of management and leadership and corporate purpose, has recently rethought the purpose of a corporation and re-articulated what it thinks the responsibilities of business in America are. And I'm going to use what's happened in America as the starting off point for this discussion, because I think its implications for the management of reputation and the management of corporate relationships is absolutely critical. And so I'm going to start with a sort of quick history lesson about the way that business in America has evolved over essentially the last 50 years. Because I think that something happened almost 50 years ago in 1971 that had a profound, perhaps even seismic, influence on the way business has run. And frankly, set American business in particular, but ultimately global business, in a very dangerous direction. In 1971, as many of you will be aware, because there's a quote in the article that everybody is familiar with, Milton Friedman, the Chicago economist, wrote an article for the New York Times. And Milton Friedman, who was a disciple of Ayn Rand and, by my standards at least, an extraordinarily right-wing figure in politics and economics, he's probably slightly to the left of Francis, came out with a blanket condemnation of corporate social responsibility. And in attacking the idea of corporate social responsibility, which was becoming very popular among large companies at the time, he said that famously, the only social responsibility of business is to make a profit for its shareholders. Now, there are a number of ways of interpreting that statement, and there are a number of ways of thinking about that. On one level, it's a statement that has almost no meaning, because to say that the responsibility of business is to make money for the shareholders doesn't really answer the question, doesn't even address the question, of whether being socially responsible is good business. In other words, if you can make more money by building great stakeholder relationships, and if corporate social responsibility helps you build better stakeholder relationships, then corporate social responsibility is in fact good for shareholders. That's one way of looking at it. It's clearly not what Friedman intended, and it's not the lesson that American CEOs took away from that article as they started to think about it. What they took away from it was we have to be focused ultimately not on the long-term sustainable interests of the corporation, but on the short-term quarterly profit of the corporation. That being responsible to our shareholders means maximizing shareholder value every single quarter, no matter what the cost. And that really is the way that American business has evolved. Now, it took some time for this article to have an impact. The Business Roundtable, which in 1971 had a statement about the purpose of the corporation that emphasized the corporation's role in society, did not change its ideas about the purpose of the corporation until 22 years ago, 1987. The Business Roundtable finally came around formally to agreeing with Milton Friedman. And in its statement in 1987 said that to believe that the board of directors had a responsibility to manage in the interest of all stakeholders was a fundamental misconstruing of the role of directors. In fact, it said that to balance the interests of all stakeholders is simply untenable. I was already writing about public relations when the statement came out. And I was, frankly, astonished and stunned. Because essentially what the Business Roundtable was saying is, we have all of these people on our boards of directors. They are paid millions of dollars. They have tremendous experience in business. They are here for their wisdom and their intelligence. They are here because they understand business better than anybody else on the planet. But we can't possibly expect them to make difficult decisions. That would be too much to ask. They have to just simply be focused on maximizing shareholder value. In other words, we're paying these people millions of dollars to do what a teenager with a pocket calculator could do just as well. If there's no difficult decision to be made, there's no point in having a board of directors. And yet, this is how American business had decided to orient itself 22 years ago. And what had happened in between was 2 or 3 very interesting things that had contributed to this. The first thing is that we had seen between 1971 and 1987 the first wave of hostile takeovers. We had seen corporate raiders looking at companies that they believed were undervalued, that weren't maximizing shareholder value, and saying, we can come in, we can use all kinds of new financing, junk bonds were becoming incredibly popular at the time, to take over these companies and run them for the benefit of their shareholders in a much more profitable way. That was the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened was that President Ronald Reagan introduced a series of policies and a series of laws that emasculated the labor movement in the United States, that crippled unions and organized labor, so that suddenly the most powerful force keeping business in check, what John Kenneth Galbraith had described as an important countervailing force for the power of big business, essentially had no power left. And so big business could do more or less what it wanted to. The third thing that happened, that turned out to be critically important, was that Ronald Reagan changed the tax structure of the United States in ways that had a profound impact on people who earned a lot of money. So it used to be that if you earned more than about $10 million in the US, everything you earned over $10 million would be taxed at about 90%. The top marginal tax rate in the US was very high. Reagan brought that down to about 40%. Today it's about 30%. One of the changes that came about because of that is that suddenly, if you were the CEO of a company, it was very, very attractive to pay yourself not tens of millions of dollars, but hundreds of millions of dollars. There was no point in earning hundreds of million dollars if 90% of that money was going to go to the government. But now that you got to keep most of it, it was suddenly very appealing. And so we had a world in which CEOs were looking to compensate themselves much more highly than they ever had been before, in which shareholders were looking at any company that had a couple of bad quarters and saying, we can come in and take over and do better, and in which there was no countervailing force in place to stop the worst excesses of management. And so we suddenly, over that period between 1971 and 1987, moved into a world in which shareholders became the only really important stakeholder group for most organizations. And in the years since then, and bear in mind, since the Business Roundtable did this, we've only seen 22 years go past. It's the blink of an eye in terms of human history. It's not even a particularly significant amount of time in terms of corporate history. And yet, this idea that the only responsibility of business is to make a lot of money for its owners has become conventional wisdom and accepted practice not only in the United States, but in the entire English-speaking world. And because it is accepted practice in the English-speaking world, it has also become accepted in most of the developing world, because when we began to see the emergence of free enterprise in markets like Russia and in markets like Eastern Europe, the people who were here helping businesses develop and adopt governance standards that were aligned with the rest of the world, those people came primarily from the UK and the US. The number of business advisors from those countries, management consultants, accountants, financial people, who flooded into markets like Russia in the wake of democratization and free market capitalism, brought with them this idea that the only constituency that mattered was the shareholder. And we've seen that be the conventional wisdom. In some ways, we've seen it enshrined into law. over a 22-year period. What happened last month, therefore, was a fairly major story, certainly in America, but I think also globally, when CEOs of American corporations said that companies, in fact, should be managed for the benefit of all their stakeholders, their employees, their customers, their communities, their suppliers, and yes, their shareholders, that those interests should in fact be in harmony and in balance. It was a profound change. And there are, I think, 2 or 3 reasons for that. Some of them are specific to the United States. Some of them are more global. The first, I think, is that as we have seen what shareholder capitalism does, we have seen a massive rise in inequality. We have seen CEOs who in 1987 earned on average 20 times more than the average worker, now earning more than 350 times the average worker. It is clear that the people who have benefited from growth and productivity in the last 20 years have been CEOs and shareholders and not ordinary working people. And this has had, in the United States, I would argue, some profound implications, one of which is now an overwhelming feeling that capitalism, as it currently exists in the United States, is not good for ordinary people. We have seen an erosion of social cohesion in the United States. Its manifestation most recently is Trump. Trump as a phenomenon came about because people feel that they have no hope, that the system is rigged against them, that the establishment, whether it's political or business, doesn't care about ordinary people and is leaving them behind. And they are prepared to inflict chaos on society just to express their anger and frustration. And we see that in the UK. Now we see it in Brazil, we see it in Italy, we see it in markets around the world, that people are becoming more and more dissatisfied with a system that benefits the few at the expense of the many. And corporations are becoming very, very worried by this, and particularly by the younger generation. I think it came as a huge shock to American companies a year ago when a series of surveys showed that millennials, young people in America, preferred socialism to capitalism by a margin of about 56 to 44. American kids are so convinced that capitalism doesn't work that they are prepared to embrace a system that has essentially been dead in most of the world for the last 20 years. Now, I don't think that when they say they want socialism, they want the kind of socialism that was the norm in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union for sort of 20 years ago, until the wall came down. But I think what they mean is they want a system that works for ordinary people. But this, I think, has made business in America extremely nervous. And so you have seen this rethinking of what the purpose of a corporation is and who it should serve. Now, I've been writing about public relations and about business for 35 years, more than half my life, considerably more than half my life. And over that time, I've heard CEOs and business leaders say a lot of things. I believe about 10% of them. And so I remain somewhat skeptical that this statement about the purpose of business being to serve society as a whole and needing to take into consideration shareholders, employees, communities, consumers, suppliers, the environment, all of the things that that we as public relations people spend a lot of time thinking about. I will believe that there is real substantial change going on when I actually see companies begin to make sacrifices in terms of their shareholders in order to benefit one of those other audiences. Certainly, when corporate tax cuts went through just 2 years ago, there was no evidence at all, despite what Republican politicians in America said, that companies were interested in sharing all the money that they got back from the government with anybody other than their CEOs and their shareholders. So 2 years ago, companies were not trying to run themselves for the benefit of all. If there was another tax cut tomorrow, I suspect that most of that money would still go into share buybacks rather than into paying people more, or to raising the minimum wage, or to giving consumers a break, or indeed into investing in environmental health and safety to protect the community. But if we as public relations people are going to take this seriously, then there is an opportunity within the organization. I'm going to say something a little cynical in a moment, big surprise. There is, either way, an opportunity within companies for us to step up and take a much bigger role. Because essentially what companies are saying when they say we want to run for the benefit of the entire society in which we function, we understand that we operate with a license that is granted to us by the community, by the society, by the country, by the people. What they are saying is we have to think about our reputation and our relationship with all of these diverse groups. We have to think about our relationship with employees. We have to think about our relationship with shareholders. We have to think about, anyway, I won't go through the whole list again because I'm getting tired of it. But suddenly this is an opportunity for the one person in the C-suite or at the top of the organization whose job it is to understand those people and whose job it is to build relationships with those people. And that's you. Now, this is where the cynical bit comes in, okay? It's an opportunity whether they mean it or not. It's an opportunity whether they are sincere or not. It's an opportunity whether this commitment is authentic or not. Let's assume for a moment, again, because I'm being cynical, let's assume for a moment that they don't mean it. That actually this is what we often refer to as just PR. In other words, we're just trying to make ourselves look good and sound good, but we're not really going to change our behavior. We're not really going to do things better. Even if that's true, it represents an opportunity for you as communicators, because you can't just issue this statement and then go back to doing everything the same way. You have to at least make it sound as if you care about this stuff going forward. And so you as communicators will have a job trying to convince people that your company actually cares about them. Trying to convince employees, trying to convince the community, trying to convince everybody else that the company actually cares about them. And that job is suddenly more important than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because companies have made a commitment, and now they have to at least look as if they're trying to live up to it. So the worst case scenario is your skills as spin meisters, your skills as people who know how to frame a message. There's a wonderful English phrase. I'm not entirely sure this will translate into Russian, so bear with me. Your ability to polish a turd. Your ability to take something that is frankly execrable and make it look pretty good will be more important going forward than it ever has been before. That's the worst case scenario, and I sincerely hope that that's not the scenario. What I hope is that you will now be called upon not to be mere communicators, not to be the people who try to sell the company message to all of these different stakeholders. That there will be a recognition that communication on its own is not enough. And I'm going to stop here, and some of you will have heard me say this before, but I believe that there's a fundamental difference between what I call communication, which I've just described to a certain extent, and what I call public relations. Communication is, in this context at least, essentially what you say. Public relations, the ability to build relationships between your organization or your client and all of the people upon whom it depends for success, all of those stakeholder groups that I've just talked about. Public relations is not just communication, it's also behavior. If you think about the relationships that you have in your real lives, in your personal lives, they're not based on what you say, they're based on how you behave. If I tell you that I have tremendous respect for you, that you're one of my favorite people, and then I punch you in the gut, what are you going to believe? My words or my actions? It's the same way in the corporate realm. If you claim to care about the environment and to be beyond petroleum, for example, at the same time that you're spilling millions of gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, if you claim that you're going to help people fly the friendly skies at the same time that one of your flight attendants is dragging a customer off the plane, forcibly removing people, putting dogs in overhead bins and killing them, believe me, people do not think that they're flying the friendly skies. If you don't behave appropriately, if you don't really change, in this environment, we are living, again, many of you will have heard me say this before, if we are living in an age of radical transparency. We are living in an age where everything you think and do and say finds its way via the internet, via social media, via whistleblowers and employees and customers with cell phone videos, all the way through to the front page of the New York Times and the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal, almost overnight. It happens immediately. We are living in an age where if there is a gap between what you say you're doing and what you're really doing, people will find out about that gap and they will punish you for it. And so suddenly the management of reputation can no longer be just words. It has to be behavior as well. And in that environment, you need to be true public relations professionals. You need to be helping guide the organization, not just in what it says about its policies and practices, but how it creates those practices. In this environment, in order for companies to be credible, and therefore, I would argue, in order for capitalism to be sustainable, in order for capitalism to survive, in order for big business to remain the driving engine of economies around the world, the management of reputation and the management of stakeholder relationships has to be a function in the C-suite at the highest level. Any time that an organization makes a decision about policy, not about communication, about what it does, not about what it says, then it needs to consider four broad perspectives. It needs to consider operational implications. It needs to consider financial implications. It needs to consider legal implications. And it needs to consider reputation implications. Now, every company that I do business with, I would suggest every company in this room has a chief legal officer, a chief operations officer, and a chief financial officer who have access to the CEO, who are part of the decision-making process inside organizations. I believe that the senior public relations person in an organization should be at exactly that level. I have a quick question. Of the various communications directors or in-house PR people in the room, how many of you believe that in your company, your advice, your counsel on behavior and policy is just as important as the legal, operational, and financial advice? 2, 3 hands? 4 hands? 5 hands? Wow. Okay, that's a huge number of hands. I'm not kidding. That's way more than I would see, if you're being honest, that's actually hugely impressive, that your organizations already take public relations as seriously as they do finance and law and operations. That is where every company in this room needs to be in 5 years. If we are going to get to a point where reputation is taken seriously, and we understand that reputation comes not from spin, not from communications, not from what we say, not from our press releases and our advertising and our sort of statements of CSR, but from actual change in policy, in actually running the corporation as if we care about every stakeholder, then everybody in this room, 5 years from now, should be in that position. They should be in a place where the CEO seeks their opinion and listens to their opinion as seriously as he does to that of his lawyers, that of his accountants, that of his management consultants, that of his marketing agencies, that of any other trusted advisor. We are, I believe, entering an era where there will be a substantial difference in the performances of companies that do this well. If you are able to maintain strong, mutually beneficial relationships with your community, with your employees, with your shareholders, with your customers, and with your suppliers, you will outperform companies that are exclusively focused on one narrow group. Because over the long term, this is how business thrives. What does that mean? That means that you, more than anyone else, except maybe the CEO who has to understand and accept and take on board the advice that you give him, you, the people in this room, will be the people who make the difference between extraordinarily successful companies and ordinary companies. You have the ability, more than ever, in managing reputations and managing relationships, to make a significant difference to the success of your organizations. That's why I believe this is a tremendously exciting time to be in public relations. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks.
Давайте еще раз.
Let's thank Paul for this wonderful performance and speech. So we use a lot of words, and lateral transparency is the ready hashtag. Right now, I'd like to invite the next speaker. This is the first coming of Francis Inkram, the General Director of PRCA. I'd like to tell a couple of words about this. This is Association of Communication and Public Relations, founded in 1960s, working in 66 countries, very successful organization. This is the first coming of Francis to Russia, and we asked him to share his vision on the trends of communications today and for the future. Francis, welcome.
Elena, thank you very much indeed for inviting me to Moscow today, and it's my great pleasure to be your guest, and I'd like to congratulate you and all of you on such an impressive event here. In a moment, I'm going to talk about global trends, global challenges, and I've been asked to talk about the Bell Pottinger case of a couple of years ago. And then we're going to make a little announcement as well. I do those things with the perspective that comes from 12 years as Director General of the PRCA and 7 as Chief Executive of ECO. And actually, some of what Paul was talking about a moment ago, about the gap between what people say and what people do, and the era, as he put it, of radical transparency, that's relevant to everything I'm going to say as well. Except, unlike Paul, I'm not fluent in American, just English, I'm afraid. But a few words about the associations I run. 50 years ago, this year, the PRCA was founded in London. It was a very small membership body for 12 agencies. I believe only one of them exists in its current form today, and that's Hill & Knowlton. Today, the PRCA is the largest PR association in the world. In the UK alone, we represent and regulate, and the word regulate is relevant, over 30,000 PR practitioners. 500 corporate agencies are our members, 400 in-house communications teams, 25 universities. 3 years ago, we opened an office in Dubai, creating PRCA Middle East and North Africa, and covering a further 13 companies. Last year, we opened in Singapore to create PRCA Southeast Asia, with a further 10 countries involved. And next month, we will launch in Buenos Aires to create PRCA Latin America, with another 18 countries. ECO was founded 30 years ago in London. It's an umbrella body that brings together 41 associations around the world, covering 3,000 PR agencies. And I say that only by way of context, because I hope it conveys to you the fact that we know what we're talking about when we talk about global trends, and we have a pedigree of enforcing ethical behavior as well. So first of all, the global trends. We always use the ECO World Report, now in its 15th year, and published in conjunction with the Holmes Report, to provide us with our insight into the world market. We break down responses from agency heads around the world into 8 regional markets, and the data that we have gives us enormous amount of insight. And just while I'm here, the 2019 survey is currently live, so if you'd care to fill it in, we'd be delighted to get insight from Russia as well. As an aside, we launched the last year's report in Singapore. We'd be delighted, if possible, to launch the next one here in Moscow. The main findings from the report would be these. For the last decade, the international PR industry has weathered a very difficult political and economic climate. And although Paul and I take a different political view on things, I think we would both agree that these have been tumultuous years. There's a new kind of politics in America, there's political uncertainty in the Middle East, continued change in Asia Pacific, and I frankly have no idea what's going on in my own country at the moment regarding Brexit. And yet, our industry has prospered despite, or in some cases because, of those difficulties. And if I talk about the UK market, for example, Brexit has had no impact, discernibly whatsoever, on the state of the UK market as I see it. So while differences exist between different regions of the world, different specialisms, different practices, different models, and different sizes of agencies, there are some clear themes. The first one is optimism. In every region of the world, agency heads are optimistic about the future of their company. They see a growing market and they see growing opportunities. In every region too, and I mean in every one of those 8 regions, agency heads expect the next year to be more profitable than the year that has preceded it. And that has been the case in pretty much every one of the years of the last decade. There is growth and there is optimism within every part of the PR market around the world. So when we talk about the challenges that we face and the problems we must address, it is within the context of our industry being a growing one everywhere around the world and in every year. So what's driving this industry forward? I would highlight 4 factors. First of all, CEOs continue to invest more and more in their corporate reputation, to refer to what Paul was talking about a moment ago. The investor activism and social media transparency have intensified the focus, not just on delivering good numbers, but on doing so with integrity. So I agree with Paul absolutely on that. And that's helped fuel a demand for senior counsel. Now, separate to this, but allied with it, is a renewed emphasis, I would say, on corporate social responsibility in its genuine meaning. And that is driving our industry forward in many regions around the world. And that plays to our belief, and to belief that CEOs increasingly have, that the most valuable asset they have is their reputation. Now, secondly, the blending of disciplines is being met by our industry willing and able to diversify our offering into new areas. Our agility is proving to be our main strength. And I would refer that to our ownership of storytelling, allowing us to outpace other marketing rivals. When I took my role as Director General of the PRC 12 years ago, we spoke a great deal, agency heads spoke a great deal, about would advertising and marketing eat into them. The reverse has proved to be the case. Because marketing spend continues, and this is the third point, to migrate away from big budget advertising campaigns and towards PR activity. And we see that trend growing every year. And when I talk about this, it isn't just a rhetoric. It is based on the numbers that we have collected every year from every region of the world, from agency heads in all of those regions. The final factor, and again present in every part of the world, is digital. PR is excellent at digital. A clear majority of respondents in every one of the 8 regions last year say that they are confident they are meeting clients' needs well. And encouragingly, our agency members tell us they are investing in their digital capacity. So those are the positives. What are the challenges? The client consultancy relationship is now at the top of our league table of problems. Not economic circumstances, not other disciplines, it is the client consultancy relationship. It's about clients being unable or unwilling to commit sufficient funds. It's about them being focused on the short term. It's about them lacking an understanding of what our industry really does. And this is worrying for us. It relates clearly to our inability still fully to prove our value. And that in turn relates to our underinvestment in evaluation and improving the impact of what we do. And until we do that, the very strong industry that we work in will not reach the potential that it has. So while it is the case that advertising value equivalence as the preferred measure of work are now mentioned only by 8% of agency heads around the world, an all-time low. They were still used at some point in the previous 12-month period by a majority of agency heads in 5 out of those 8 regions. And when we ask agency heads, why do you still provide AVEs, they tell us very clearly they know that they are meaningless, but their clients ask for them. They provide a big number. But to be clear, AVEs measure nothing but vanity and hold our industry back. And the sooner we abandon them, the better. Now, a very clear challenge is that of talent. Our industry still struggles to attract and then retain the very best people. And at entry level, that is about starting salaries. This talent issue has been stubbornly here with us for years. In my view, it poses a real challenge and threat to our industry. And I link it back to the failure to invest in evaluation. Unless we can prove the value that we add, we can't pay people enough to attract and retain the very best. So what's our summary of the market? Industry that's optimistic about the future, profitable, driven by big trends that play to our strengths, lots of challenges we need to face, but an industry that gets bigger and prouder and more sophisticated every year. But the numbers tell us only so much, because the challenge of reputation, as identified by your conference theme, is a critical one, possibly the most critical one facing our industry. Because our industry is so powerful and grows more powerful every year, we need to exercise that power with great caution, both for our own reputation and those of our clients. 3 months ago, the European Communication Monitor annual survey was published. 2,700 European communication leaders. And asked for their biggest challenge, they said enhancing trust above anything else. The respondents said that their target audiences varied considerably in how much they trusted them. So these 2,700 European communications leaders, 67% say that senior executives trust them. That's great. 47% of influencers trust them. 39% say journalists trust them. 27% say the public trusts them. Now, that is a serious problem for our industry if we believe the public does not trust us, and we are the people who talk about trust. At the PRCA in London, Dubai, Singapore, ECO, all around the world, we describe this as the challenge of ethical professionalism, proving that practitioners are good at what they do and that they use their skills in support of good ends. To illustrate what I mean, I was asked to talk in a little bit of detail about Bell Pottinger. The demise of Bell Pottinger in 2017, arguably one of the most famous PR firms at the time, or of all time, a firm that no longer exists. And I was slightly hesitant to talk about it again, so I'll talk about it a lot. And then on the plane over here yesterday, I was reading the New York Times. And I turned to page 2, and there's an article about Bell Pottinger and its demise. So it does seem still relevant. If you Google it, if you Google Bell Pottinger PRCA, as of last night, you find 18,900 results. And those results relate to our expulsion as PRCA, Bell Pottinger on September the 5th, 2017, and its collapse as a company on September the 12th, 2017, 1 week. Its demise shows that public expectations of PR practitioners are high, that social media means unethical practice has nowhere to hide, and that we should embrace these developments, and also that associations need to meet their public responsibilities. Because if they don't, if we don't as practitioners, then we condemn ourselves to a spiral, as Bell Pot found, of irrelevance, stagnation, decline, collapse, or takeover. So here's what happened with Bell Pottinger, as a sort of inside track on it. On the 3rd of July 2017, we received a complaint from the Democratic Alliance, the main opposition party in South Africa. It was about Bell Pot's work for Oak Bay Capital, a perfectly bland corporation in South Africa. But what Bell Pot was doing in South Africa was not bland at all. The Democratic Alliance alleged that Bell Pot's fake news work had exploited, created racial tensions, and as such was against our code of conduct. And our code sets out a very formal, legalistic way of dealing with complaints. It involves lawyers, it involves written submissions, it involved the Democratic Alliance politicians flying in from South Africa to London. It involved the managing director and the board and barristers from Bell Pottinger on the other side. And the hearing lasted for 8 hours. And the recommendation of our independent panel was to expel them. Our board approved that expulsion, they appealed, we rejected that appeal. On September the 5th, Bell Pot was expelled with immediate effect, and 1 week later it ceased to exist. We expelled them because they had broken our charter so comprehensively and so appallingly that the reputation of our industry was on the line, and the work they had done had created real social and political harm. By any reasonable standard of judgment, they had inflamed racial discord in South Africa, and the Democratic Alliance described their work as hateful and divisive, campaigning to divide South Africa along the lines of race. And they were spreading fake news. I firmly believe that had we cleared Bell Pottinger, the damage to the reputation of our industry all around the world would have been enormous. But because we did expel them, and because the industry rallied behind us, the reputation, I believe, of our industry is stronger, because we proved we have standards and that they are enforced. Within 24 hours of the expulsion, 21 agencies applied to join the PRCA in the UK. Within 48 hours, there were 121 national and international newspaper articles, including The Times, The Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, and so on. There were 23 news reports on the TV. Within a week of the expulsion, a major UK membership body asked us to run it, and within a month of the expulsion, another membership body in the UK asked to merge with us. Now, Bell Pottinger believed it could survive the expulsion. Indeed, I understand one of its senior directors said it was a storm in a teacup. Within a few days of the expulsion, they were making redundancies. Within a week, it was bankrupt and closed. Why? And there's a broader lesson for our industry here, which is why we make the example of Bell Pot. Because clients ran away from it, purely that. Because clients were fearful of being associated with a company that was not ethical. And they ran away from it, breaking all of their contracts. They preferred to invest in their own reputation and take the potential hit of being sued for breaking contracts. And they left very publicly, distancing themselves from the people who used to advise them. We have said for years that a company's most valuable reputation most valuable asset is its reputation. And ironically, the collapse of a PR company that managed reputation proved that to be true. Internationally, we had enormously positive response. Richard Edelman described it as a proud day for the industry. Around a dozen PR associations strengthened their codes of conduct. And at ECO, we issued general guidance in 10 principles for our members all around the world, setting a baseline of behavior. I said when we launched those principles, and they're things like respecting the truth. They are basic things, not astroturfing, not engaging in fake news. I said that my conviction is that our industry is a fundamentally ethical one. But in this era of ever-increasing transparency, the radical transparency Paul referred to, we will be scrutinized more and more and judged on our behavior than just our words. I said that 2 years ago, and I believe it to be true now. And there are principles of behavior that apply as much in London or Moscow or New York or Paris or anywhere else around the world. And we, I hope, embrace those. What lessons can we learn from the collapse of Bell Pottinger? First of all, that practitioners welcome self-regulation. In an era of ever-increasing transparency, practitioners need to be held to high standards, and in my experience, they embrace those. Secondly, governments expect it as well. The move towards government regulation in the UK has definitely receded because of our actions with Bell Pottinger. More to the point, though, the public expect self-regulation to work. Public expectations have shifted dramatically in the past decade, both for our industry and in general. 10 years ago, Bell Pottinger would still be in existence. It would have survived that storm. Social media makes that impossible now, and unethical PR practitioners have nowhere left to hide. And I believe it provides advantage to practitioners who embrace it. The days when clients would take anybody on, if only they were able effectively to massage their reputation, have gone. The number of companies who prosper with that kind of dodgy work gets smaller and smaller every year. So in one sentence, tough self-regulation is the right thing to do for our industry, both ethically and also in its self-interest. So to conclude, our PR world grows bigger, but also smaller every year. Bigger as the industry expands, smaller as it becomes increasingly connected. And it's vital that we take the opportunity to address common issues together, and that's one of the reasons I'm delighted to be here in Moscow. There truly are common issues all around the world. Attracting and retaining the very best talent, proving the value that we add, creating a more diverse workforce that just brings the very best people to us, taking advantage of the blending of disciplines, addressing the challenge of automation, and meeting society's expectations, and proving our ethical professionalism. These are truly global challenges, and I believe we can address them best if we address them together. And that drives the international vision of the PRCA and of ECO. As the latest development of that PR international family, we're going to be launching PRCA Russia in a couple of moments. It's a great day for our industry, the dawn, I believe, of a new era of Anglo-Russian cooperation. Practitioners in Russia, the UK, all around the world share these common challenges, so let's address them together. As the world's largest PR association, we are delighted to announce this new relationship with you, our Russian friends and colleagues, and I know that together we will drive our industry forward to new heights. I'm personally honoured to have been asked to be PRCA Russia's inaugural chairman, and I look forward to working with Elena in the years to come. Elena?
Thank you very much, Francis, and once again, welcome to Russia. Dear colleagues, I just would like to say a few words in Russian. It's true, we are launching PRCA in Russia, and that's a big event for us because that's a global communication organization that brings together corporations, consultants, agencies, specialists all over the market. And it's great that PRCA is coming to Russia today. Francis has outlined the major goals that we face, and we are going to use the 50-year experience in order to develop our market further. And I would also like to say that we are going to use the resources and the global presence to develop the reputation of our sector, of our industry.
PR in Russia. This is a great amount of very bright, wonderful, effective and ethic companies, and due to PRCA, the world would know our achievements, our high level of communications in Russia. And thank you very much, Francis, for coming here in order to, let's say, present the new organization in Russia. I'd like to welcome you, invite you all to join it. Thank you. Right now, after our speeches in the framework of a Leadership Dialogue Forum, we'll have the strategic discussion battle. Welcome. Good day, dear colleagues. Right now we have panel sessions, the dialogue of generations, and for this discussion we need to have chairs for our speakers. On this scene on the floor, right now we have some small video. We have a small technical break, let's say. We have video that will be the advertisement. A minute, let's say, till the end of this year. We are getting and receiving the cases for honoring the best in communications. Let's see what happened last year.
We unite nations, international connections. Moscow, Warsaw, Minsk, Astana, Baku, Tallinn, Budapest, Shanghai, all city are cool. Vilnius, Yerevan, Ljubljana and Riga. We connecting people in it's Vintiana Ibra in new day. We got a one way, ready to play a big game and win anyway. And we expect only excellent results and good job. Never give up because life is too short. Give me the high five, we worldwide like Wi-Fi. No lie like my mic, true story and our time. And now is the moment, I think you're ready, yeah, to reveal the results and see who the best in this year. Golden world of words, this a modern wars. Each generation voice and we make our choice, honoring the best in communication. We unite nation, international connection. It's all for our future and popularization. Be the best, be the greatest, be the one, be the patient. All around the world, we make it for the people. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Vitiana Ibra.
So a couple of more minutes and then we will invite our speakers to the stage. Dear friends, at the entrance you could get the headsets for simultaneous interpretation. So for those who need it, I hope you've had the opportunity to had it. You would have the opportunity to ask the questions after the battle. So please get ready.
Отлично.
Excellent. Thank you very much for discussions, dialogue of generations. We invite to this stage our speakers, the founder, the Paul Holmes report, Paul Holmes, the head of PRCA, Francis Ingham, please. The Dean of Russian State Social University, Natalia Pachinok. Master of High School of Economics, this is Alina German. Dear colleagues, I will speak Russian. Please use the simultaneous interpretation for the translation into English. Let's start with a very simple question. It's very simple from the first side. The topic of our forum this year, this is reputation. What do you think? Do you have your own very good reputation? And I'm sure you are, but otherwise we wouldn't have invited you. Why it is good? What do you do for this? Or do you do something intentionally? I offer to start from that and move forward. Paul, please.
Okay, thanks very much for inviting me to join this panel. This is positioned as a sort of battle of the generations, is that right? So I assume the young lady at the far end and I are representing the young generation, and
She'll be the victim.
Okay, I doubt it. So, like I said, I think we are all judged more by what we do and how we act than what we say. And I've always taken the view, and I suspect that this is how Francis operates at PRCA based on what we just heard now, that if you want to be a true, first of all, as a representative of the industry and an analyst of the industry, I obviously have a tremendous amount of respect for and optimism for what public relations is and what it could be. At the same time, I think, have a pretty clear view of the gap between those two things, and the fact that often our industry doesn't live up to the kind of ethical standards, the kinds of standards of practice and quality that are necessary in order for us to flourish. And my job as a friend and analyst of the industry is to look at it as honestly as possible, not to be uncritical, not to be supportive of everything that the industry does, but to point out when we're not doing it the way we should. And the key to that is intellectual honesty. I think this is something that trade magazines and trade publications and probably trade organizations suffer with all the time, which is, how can I be honest about the people who are paying me? How can I be honest about the people who are advertising or sponsoring my events or inviting me to wonderful trips to Moscow? And the answer is that as soon as you're not honest, as soon as you become a shill, then you lose value to everybody. The only reason that people want to be associated with the Holmes Report, in as far as they do, is because they think we have a measure of trust and respect and reputation throughout the industry. And the first time that we compromise that, the first time that we do something to, make one of our advertisers look good when they're bad, to make one of our sponsors look good when they're bad, then we become useless to everybody. That's the other point that I think it's important to make, is reputation and managing reputation and therefore behaving ethically is absolutely in your self-interest. The moment you stop doing it is the moment you lose credibility, trust, and therefore value. And so we just do our best to be honest, which sounds glib and simplistic. But I think that's where our reputation, such as it is, comes from.
Спасибо.
There's very agree with, sadly, on that. It is in every organisation's long-term self-interest to adhere to ethical values and to have that intellectual honesty you refer to. So, given it's the obvious example to use, when the complaint was made against Bell Pottinger, there were a great many people in the industry who presumed that we would find in their favour. Bell Pottinger paid us a lot of money and had a seat on our board. And the easy thing to do would have been to just find some workaround and to not expel them. And the process of dealing with the case and expelling them consumed a massive amount of time, a massive amount of money in terms of legal costs and stress. I mean, I received daily videos of ways to be killed in South Africa from various people in South Africa. Quite rough videos, really. People came round to our home in the middle of the night from South Africa. But we did the right thing in expelling them and proving the industry has standards, despite all the pressure that was on us to do the opposite. But we did the right thing. And the consequence, actually, like I say, was that we had 24 agencies apply to join us within 24 hours of us expelling them. We had 2 membership bodies merge into us. So I suppose we are directly, as a result of enforcing ethical standards, about a third bigger than we were when we did so, and that's just in the UK, let alone elsewhere. So I do believe we live up to our values, and we don't just talk a good talk, we actually do the right thing, and that's really important for an organisation's reputation, respectability, and long-term appeal and interest.
Алексей, ну я
Спасибо.
понимаю, что...
Yes, I understand, Alexei, that the question was upon the whole not about organization, but it was very personal question, I think. Our colleagues, I guess, from the UK were very politically correct, but right now I think you tell us the truth, right? This is the question which we call it like the truth. But it has very different views on this kind of truth. There is truth, what you feel yourself, how you feel yourself and act. Another truth, and evaluation of your reputation, if you're bad or good. From you can get this view from your colleagues, from your close friends, close people. And another truth, for example, about yourself, that is being formed by the market of communications, let's say, by the industry. And it's huge, really. The faster you are moving forward, if you are brave enough to take up the tasks that you're trying to resolve, this outside circle of the truth, let's say, is becoming from the blue ocean once you do everything yourself for building nice reputation in your closest circle, let's say, with your closest people, you get into the red ocean once you are not 100% person who form your reputation and manage it. You are, let's say, in the purple ocean. Once you are, let's say, on the side of the fence, and another time you are on the side of the attack. And so the evaluation is given in this case by the person who maybe hasn't seen you or has seen you on TV or the forum or on this forum or your or somewhere else. I liked Francis' speech about the formation of reputation, how to do this, how values right now exist in young people. I want to add a great amount of people I spend with the young people. I'm the dean of one of the most of the greatest university in Russia. Young people, not only young people, want this truth, this demand for the truth. Who are you and what do you do? What's the person you are? It's very important, this question to the young people, and being the head, being the person. I want that the word truth would be promoted not from the top management, let's say, from the heads, but through maybe digital technologies. We would tell about this topic more and how these digital technologies would impact the truth. It's like when the cover is looks sweeter than the inside, sweet. And the brand, for example, is being promoted by the company and or the person, but inside there is zero. There is nothing. Emptiness. This now doesn't function, doesn't work. And the check for the check of the facts works now better. This is what is being done right now, and it will be done faster with a great amount of data, a database and some other data that cannot be really true or being fake. You are can be on the on different sides. Being the attacker or defender. Right now, I believe that the verification, let's say, validation of the person that right now is happening in the States. For the student, for all the persons, all this data is being checked. This is not like the nice cover of the not very sweet, tasty, sweet candy will be affordable. That will be a breakthrough. As me or someone else would look like in the eyes of some other people. Probably have seen me, met me somewhere. Please raise your hands who thinks that I have very nice reputation. Maybe I don't have good reputation. This is some average number, right? Can we have this kind of average figure? Well, I think you have very nice figures right now. Maybe someone is modest. Thank you very much. I've seen 25 hands. I think this is very good results. Alina, please try your voting. Alina, I want to highlight this view that you mentioned, that reputation now equals to personal brand. Today, in all the sites, platforms, we should be sincere, but we cannot be not sincere. It's all visual, and people from communications really follow it. This is the person from communications should understand this industry psychologically, very deeply. Even in the websites, web pages, form the brand consciously. not only strategically, and identifies the person and the specialist, and let's say make these things equal.
So a good PR specialist is a sincere person that loves his or her job, and this person should understand how important it is to build a reputation, and he has to be aware of this, and he uses different social media, and he or she should identify themselves as a PR specialist so that it would be visible for everybody else, so that the public at large could identify this person, could imagine this person, what kind of he or she is. I might be mistaken, but basically what I hear is a good PR specialist is a good person. Who agrees with this statement? Yes, I think that being sincere and open is very important. So a PR person should be transparent. Is that what you're saying? Yes. Bravo. My next question might be a bit more difficult. Reputation can be different. For example, if we focus on corporate reputation, it can be reputation of corporation itself, or as an employer, the reputation for stakeholders, reputation of leaders, or reputation of brand, or services and products that the company produced. And there can be differences, there can be conflicts between different points. So let's now start with Alina this time. Just to sum up your question, you ask about the difference between different categories. So you mentioned leaders, organization or company, and products and services that it produces. Well, if we speak about just one sector, it doesn't have to be. But yeah, let's just focus on one. Maybe I studied many years ago, and maybe I studied different kind of things. But for me, all these three categories belong to the same ecosystem. You know, there can't be conflicts between the reputation of leaders and the reputation of corporation and the reputation of products that the corporation produces. Being a provost of the biggest social university in this country, I will never associate university, myself, students and teachers with research that do harm, that are not true, that are not that are harmful for people. And I will never say something that is not in line with the strategy of our brand, because you know, it's very fast that you know, the feedback that you get will show that the company fails. So there's a big risk if you do something wrong, something which is not in line with your values. I think that harmonic development of all the three instruments is the key to success. So there must be balance between these things. And if something sticks out from this harmony, you should make a step backwards. For example, your brand might be more powerful than the products that you provide. So maybe you should make a step backward so that you develop everything in harmony. But you know, there are so many examples about leaders, and sometimes the reputation of the leaders does a lot of good to the company, or vice versa. Well, you know, take a horse and the carriage. You know, the carriage cannot pull the horse. unless it is sliding down the hill. So, of course, the leader guides the company. But anyway, since we speak about the reputation, you know, it's not only about enthusiasm or teamwork or the skills and other things. Of course, the leader has to identify the goals, offers the products and services. But anyway, it must be an organic and harmonious model. So there shouldn't be any conflicts between different components. Francis and Paul, you're welcome.
As some of you will probably have guessed, I've never had any media training myself. But I've spoken to a lot of media trainers over the years, and one thing that they've told me is that part of media training is the ability to answer the question that you wanted to answer rather than the question that was asked. So I'm going to turn the question around a little bit and talk not about the difference between the leader and the organization, because I think that was just covered very well, but to look at it from the perspective of the audience and say, just as it is very important to have the brand, corporate and leadership reputation aligned, it is very important to have the expectations of all the people that you're communicating with aligned. And it used to be the case that you could tell shareholders one thing and employees something else. So you could go to your shareholders and say, everything's great, and we're making a ton of money, and then the next day turn around to your employees and say, no, we can't give you a raise, times are very tough, and assume that you could get away with conflicting messages. But we are living in a world in which all of the audiences that you communicate with overlap as well. So many of your consumers may be shareholders. Many of your shareholders live in the communities where you have operations. The communities where you have operations include your employees. Some of your employees are buying your stuff as well. So these are not separate stakeholder groups. And so just as it's important to make sure that corporate reputation and brand image. We have this session this afternoon on brand reputation, by the way, which is a term that I'm still trying to figure out whether I like it or not. But it's important to make sure that your messages are consistent now across all the groups that you communicate with. And that's just as important as making sure that you're internally aligned. By the way, the other thing that we don't talk about in here as much as we should is the alignment between what the company is saying and what the CEO is saying and what individual employees are saying. Because individual employees are all, whether you like it or not, ambassadors. They're all out there in the world saying things about your company, what it is like to work for, whether it really lives up to its values. To their friends and neighbors, to people on social media. And that is something that we need to get much better at, is making sure that they are saying the same things that we're saying. And fortunately, I think, the only way to do that is to be authentic. You can't get 10,000 employees to lie for you. So they are going to tell the truth. You better make sure that their truth and your truth are the same.
What is there to add to that?
Спасибо.
Yes, companies and organizations in general need to have the values aligned between their leaders and the organization as a whole. And yes, there is nowhere to hide any longer. And that's a good thing. Social media has taken away the hiding places. I guess the only other thing I would add is that in terms of segmenting your reputation, agencies in particular used to be able to, in the UK at least, to work for very different kinds of companies whose aims were often in direct competition, and to justify that internally and to the wider world. I think those days are going now. Really. We've always said you can do controversial work for uncontroversial clients and uncontroversial work for controversial clients. But we've always said that the key thing companies need to do is to be very public about who they work for. So long as somebody's work is legal, it's fine to take it on. But you need to bear in mind the reputation for your the impact. You need to bear in mind the impact on your corporate and personal reputation of the people you choose to work with, because the line that certainly 12 years ago when I took the role in London, that we just take any work that comes along, the sort of Tim Bell line, people no longer accept that. People have higher expectations that impacts on the reputation of the company as a whole and that drives their futures.
Спасибо. Спасибо огромное за ответы. Да.
Thank you very much for your answers. I would also like to add something. So we have to make the situation as transparent as possible so that all the employees of the company could share the philosophy of the company, so that they didn't write some bad things in the social media. So is it the employers or the leaders that should do this? You know, the employees that come to work at the company should understand what it's all about, what are the values. So the company has to ensure that they take right people who are willing to share their values and philosophy. Okay, thank you. My next question has been inspired by Paul's addresses and Paul's articles, which is about a social position of the company, whether the company could have this position. Maybe we won't be able to resolve it and get ready-made solutions, but anyway, it would be good to know. Of course, there's a very high level of stratification, very, very big gap in terms of income between the richest and the poorest people. So if the company begins to promote only the values of their shareholders, forgetting about the society is one thing. Then, on the other hand, we can see what happens in Hong Kong. Once the representative of the corporation made his position clear about the company's position, he had to resign the following day. So there's a very big competition between public institutions and corporate institutions. Paul, perhaps you could start, if possible.
Sure. I think that there's one thing that we should, I think, all agree on, which is that it is getting more and more difficult for companies to be neutral. So when there are big political and social issues, whether it's, to take an example that is something that we write about a lot in the US and the UK, and is becoming increasingly a global issue, something like the rights of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual community. People have obviously very different points of view on this. There are generational issues, and there are obviously different issues in different countries. But in America, I would say that today it is impossible for a company not to have a perspective. And if you don't have a perspective, you are seen as siding with the status quo. In other words, if you don't advocate on one side of the debate or another, then you're seen as being in favor of whatever the conservative position, the current position is. And companies are therefore being forced to think about what their values say about these issues. Immigration is another issue in the US that's part of this. And if you say that one of your values is equality, or if you say that one of your values is inclusion and diversity, then if you don't have a position on gay rights, then people will hold you accountable. And at the end of the day, what we're talking about here, I think, is accountability. That you don't get to decide what you are going to take a position on. Your stakeholders get to decide. Your employees get to decide. Your customers get to decide. They are voting every day with where they go to work and how they spend their money. The communities get to decide based on whether they will allow you to open a factory or a store in their neighborhood. And if you don't, first of all, understand what those groups expect of you, and second of all, do what you can to meet those expectations, then business suffers. And it's our job, one of our most important jobs. We were talking about communications earlier. And I always think that particularly when we talk about communication, what we mean is talking, right? What we mean is telling people what the company wants them to hear. But a bigger part of our job as public relations people today is not talking, it's listening. It's understanding what it is that shareholders, employees, communities, consumers expect from us. And listening to those people and then bringing what you hear back into the organization. You can't meet expectations if you don't know what they are. That part of our job is increasingly important. And so I don't think organizations have the freedom today to say we're not going to get involved. Whether it's the troubles in Hong Kong, the fires that are burning in Brazil, or any one of 100 other issues that people care about. Companies don't have to solve those issues by themselves, but they have to make sure that they are not part of the problem.
Спасибо большое.
Let me disagree slightly with that. Yeah. I think there are different expectations in different parts of the world. And I don't think it's for someone from London or New York or anywhere else for that matter to necessarily make judgments about other people's differing attitudes in different parts of the world. To an extent, that is quite an imperial colonial attitude to take. So, you operate in the Middle East. So do we. We've done events together in Dubai. Very different attitudes socially, very different laws. And it's not for us to set those countries' laws, it's for them. Secondly, I don't think it's the role, I don't think the public expects every company to take a view on political or social matters. It just expects companies to be consistent and to be transparent. So your example of BP, Beyond Petroleum, pumping oil out into the Gulf. Yeah, absolutely. Because what it was doing did not align with what it was saying. So I think that not all companies take views on social or political issues. Not all companies have to. It's up to the people who own them, and it's up to the people who work for them. And it's their choice about whether they want their reputation to be the kind of company that gets involved in those issues or not. And the public judges them on those decisions. But the problem for us as communicators is when a company says one thing and does another. So if you're going to get involved in campaigning for higher pay for people in poor parts of the world, then you can't source your materials from people in those poor parts of the world being paid rock-bottom prices. If you're going to talk about environmental impact, like one of the members of the royal family in the UK, then probably taking all your family on private jets on holidays is a bad idea. It's about your corporate reputation and your personal reputation as a whole. So if you're going to take a stance, be consistent, don't be hypocritical.
Спасибо большое. Спасибо.
Ну, я, знаете, тоже не очень соглашусь.
I'm not really going to comment. I just would like to focus on this country and share my views. and share my view as to whether the company should declare its position publicly, whether it should do something for the society. I think when people elect their governments, or the president, or the deputy, the leader of the district or the region, each person works in one company, some are self-employed.
So in the political, let's say, line, people speak about their opinion, but not the companies, but from the point of view of the community, of the society, of the social society. As the companies are obliged as well, not only to speak about the paid taxes, and so that the state or society would have the requirements in this way, would not be right. It's important to know and promote in our country as well. This corporate social responsibility of any company, not depending on the capitalization of the company. This is the strategy that should be elaborated on the development of the policy of being useful, of the usefulness of the products, and for the corporate relations inside the company, and for the society that would perceive this company would support in order to form and build nice reputation. First-class reputation is being formed not because you like the product in the company that you get from the shop, but a reputation of a reliable and trustworthy company is more formed by the steps in the corporate social responsibility. This is the society, this is the investment, this is the position that is not connected with the taxes, but the activities and all the tools that we have. Different voluntarily projects, different events, social events, development of, let's say, not profile assets, but this is the part of the successful business, and I'm sure that big companies perceive the same position in the South Africa, in United States, in the UK, and that's why the society for the society, the company should bring usefulness. This is the brand and reputation. It is being formed from the success of for the stakes, for the stakeholders, for the product that is being formed, and this is a matter of the mission of the company as well. If it's being built together with the society, the employees, I think this is the key to the success. Thank you very much. Speaking about the, let's say, elections, we wish you all success in our elections to Moscow City Duma. Let's applaud. Thank you. So, despite this trend of this public openness, companies are lagging behind, let's say, in Russia. Upon the whole, we are a little bit behind, being, let's say, not very open. If we look at the politics in Russia, let's say, be more accurate right now. Many companies are dealing with the corporate social responsibility. This is our plus. Let's say this is kind of a regime over here, and you would not be allowed to go home, maybe. But this is the joke. Please be cautious. Well, in the States, I've been to the fight to Fyodor Yemelyanenko later on. Later. This is our famous sportsman in fighting. I, let's say, listened to some news on CNN, and there all the news blog was quite controversial. I was very surprised that if it's possible, due to the escalation of the critics of the elected politics and the power, the authorities. But I think this is kind of tradition to, let's say, make dirty things open. But let's say once I turned on the TV and the general director of Starbucks company over there, so he's the current CEO. He was invited to one of the news programs about elections. Well, he said, I've been the general director of Starbucks for 1 year, of the global one. I know how to manage the company. I'm ready to become the president of this country. And I thought about myself, okay, something is going to happen. It seems like the interest of the company, the interest of the person itself is something not right is going on. What is plus? This is the kind of circle that the whole country is observing. I was very, very surprised. I was like, okay, something is going to happen. I think it's not really right to speak about the politics and compare your competences and corporate success in this way and speak about, let's say, announce your own ambitions and speak negatively about the current politics that are going on in the country. Thank you. I'd like to add, Natalia, you probably paid your attention to the leader of the Starbucks company. You already paid your attention. In this or that way, the reputation, in this case, let's say, has been contributed to, maybe increased somehow increased the rate, his rate. Well, let's say there was kind of increase in mentioning. Right now we all know about him. Or a number of references. Another point, if he's sincere about it, speaking about his ambitions, but I think here we have, let's say, plus to his reputation. Let's say right now we're speaking about hype. Let's discuss it. I think you know all this word. This is for our foreign colleagues. I think that it should be translated in the right way. Hype right now is a very special way of communication right now. Is it worth it to make KPI of communications I mean a hype, through hype? And is it somehow correlated with the ethics? Or maybe sometimes we can close our eyes when we want to hype something, to where you would apply to young bloggers, 14, 19 years, if you want to make this hype, or to the big corporations, to whom you would apply to make this hyping. So hype right now is very popular. I would apply to big or small companies or some particular person for hyping. I think for hype, this is all depends on the aim, on my aim, but you need to stick to some framework if we can go beyond some limits or not. I'm speaking about some kind of ambiguity and being sincere to the customers. That depends on the philosophy of the company. Can we be not sincere? What do you think? Just a little bit. That depends on the philosophy of the company. If the company considers it reasonable or not. But speaking about this being sincere, this is the trend. It would be, let's say, the forecast. But if it will be hype, let's say campaign, that will be all true very soon. I don't know how to measure KPI of hype. I mean, the measurements in length or width or deepness, let's say, I don't know. This is kind of the tool. I think that's about something else. If the hype is very successful, if, let's say, it charges and is a driver, this is the success. This is the success for the company. We need to get it through different resources. Through different sources. It is accepted to apply to the young people that they have very fresh, bright, let's say, brains that can work with the good and the big, important auditorium or targeted auditorium audience. If we speak about 40-year-old people, this kind of audience, well, you feel yourself young all the time. I feel myself being 23, but I'm 43. I'm interested in what young people are thinking, how they speak, how they see this hype, this development. I perceive it even more than if I can hear about it from people who are my age or some, let's say, elder people. But this is a matter of wisdom. I know you can get it through years only. Right now, companies apply to the corporations, to young people as well. Let's say it's cheaper to apply to young people. But of course, there are some bloggers that have 1 million of contacts. It could not be that cheap. Some fresh ideas, let's say, bright ideas, can become, let's say, mature from the point of view of the quality and price in young people, mainly. And I want to ask this audience, be active with involving the young people to your work. The hype that young people is thinking, oh, that will be not the one time. But this is would be very fresh. It would be very long term. Let's say I remember the times when we all in our childhood became pioneers. We got this logo, be ready, always ready. And that was the hype at that time. And you followed this, let's say, kind of strategy. That was the hype. Once they speak right now, when you see young people saying this logo, be ready, always ready, let's say young people, this is our future, very, very talented, very wonderful, and the hype is yours, of course, these days. So we have very nice road to our young people. Thank you.
Understanding hype the right way, because the way it translates into English is about exaggeration and boasting and bluster and all of that. Okay, so I think that it's important to draw a distinction between harmless, fun hype and damaging hype, right? So you'll correct me on this. I'm terrible at advertising. There's a company in the UK, I think it's Carlsberg, that as its advertising slogan for years had the slogan, probably the best beer in the world. Best lager in the world. Okay, probably the best lager in the world. Okay, it isn't. It isn't even the top 10. It probably isn't even in the top 50. It's a decent beer. That's hype. Does it matter? Do any of us care? We sort of understand that this is what advertising does. It exaggerates, it boasts, it tries to make things look a little bit better than they are. And I would say that's harmless hype. Nobody cares about that, right? Going back to my example from earlier, BP claiming that it had moved beyond petroleum, essentially saying, we are now great friends to the environment. That was hype that became damaging when it was apparent that they were full of crap. And so there's a difference. And then there's a bunch of stuff that falls somewhere in the middle of that requires the wisdom and judgment of people like you to say, wait a second, this is probably going too far. So one of you'll have to forgive me, all of my examples are from the Anglo-Saxon world, but many of you will perhaps know about the Pepsi ad a couple of years ago in which Kendall Jenner appeared and there were protests going on. And it was an ad that tried to make Pepsi look like it was in favor of inclusivity and diversity and young people. And it was just a horrible ad. It didn't work at all. And here's the point that I think I want to make about that. Young people today, more than people like us, no offense, young people today grow up bombarded by media and bombarded by messages and seeing visual branded images everywhere. And they're seeing thousands and thousands of company messages every day. And they are, this is now like oxygen to them. It's so much a part of their environment, they don't even think about it. But boy, they know the difference between something that is authentic and something that is bullshit. They have really, really good bullshit detectors. And they go off like that. And when they do, you can lose them for a lifetime. If you make a mistake and they think that they're being lied to, whether you're a tobacco company or a soft drink company or a coffee company, or if they think you're full of shit, they will ignore you for the rest of eternity. And that's the kind of hype that you need, wisdom and experience and the kind of judgment that PR people have because they've been doing this for years. But I would say that every time you bring your wisdom and judgment to bear on something like that, bring somebody who's 22 in the room and say, what do you think? Because trust me, they see things differently and understand things differently than we do. And there's stuff that we think is normal that they won't put up with. And you need to be aware of that increasingly. That's the kind of hype that can do damage.
Спасибо большое.
Можно Полу сказать? Пол, а есть...
Paul, there is hype occasional, let's say, and this is planned. If in planned hype, KPI can be located in a way not to go beyond the limits. Otherwise, it can be good as the company can be sincere. Sincerity is not always good if you do not do damage to the company. What is better, hype planned or occasional in this way?
Нет?
Okay, so I'd like to talk about something that I saw 4 or 5 years ago in Bulgaria. And so I'm not sure, right, whether this fits our definition of hype. I think it's an interesting communications case study. I'll go through it as quickly as possible. We saw this in our awards competition. And it was a campaign conducted by Avon, the cosmetics company. And Avon announced in the Bulgarian media that it was introducing a new line of makeup that was designed for a very specific reason: to help women who were victims of domestic violence cover up their bruises. And they said, we're going to introduce this, and you know, if your husband beats you, you'll be able to put this makeup on before you go to work and nobody will know. And there was a week of media coverage. Avon is a terrible company. This is just helping abusers. This is a horrible thing. And then after a week of negative coverage, they stood up in the media and say, actually, we're not introducing this line of makeup. We made the whole story is fiction. We just are now doing a partnership with domestic violence hotlines in Bulgaria to try and raise awareness of the fact that this is a problem in our country and to educate women about what they actually can do, not covering it up, but making it public. Now, on one level, they lied to people, they misled people, it was hype, They took a real societal problem and tried to turn it into a brand platform. They did, in this instance, 4 things that I would tell every company: never, ever do this. Don't lie to people, don't exaggerate, don't take advantage of an issue, don't do any of those things. Except, I thought it was brilliant. I loved it. And more to the point, it was a success. In Bulgaria, calls to domestic violence hotlines, where you could call up and say, "I'm in trouble, help me," went up by about 200%. Women started talking about this. It became a discussion. It became a problem. And Avon as a brand really strengthened its relationship with consumers, with women in particular. Women were so pleased that a company that sold makeup had spoken up for an issue that they cared about. And this is what I'm talking about when I say it's a matter of judgment. To a certain extent, it's a matter of taste. There'll be some people in this room who think that that was a horrible idea. We had judges in our awards competition who hated it for all the reasons that I just went through. They thought it was dishonest. They thought it was hype. They thought it was, just misleading. They couldn't believe that a company had done this and then taken all the bad news for a week. I thought it was courageous. I thought it was creative. And more to the point, I thought it worked. I think these campaigns can only be judged once. If people feel like they've been lied to, you screwed up. If people feel like you did something brave, then you got it right. And you never quite know until the end, and it's our job to know before we do it. And that's one of the things that makes your job so difficult. You have to really understand people. You have to understand the consumers that you're communicating with. You have to have an intimacy with them that nobody else in the organization has. And you have to know they'll find funny, this they'll find moving, this they'll find offensive. And you have to be right 99 times out of 100. And that's why I could never do what you do. My sense of humor is very different from everybody else's.
Спасибо большое. Francis.
Thank you. Francis, would you like to add something?
With that really plays the judgment point. Plays to the importance of the advice that corporate communicators give to their colleagues and their employers and their clients. And there are these very hard judgment calls. I mean, you rightly say talk about this grey area of judgment. I don't know why you're doing that. You rightly talk about this grey area of judgment, and that's where our profession earns its money, because that's the additional thing that it adds. And when I spoke earlier on, I said about a few of the challenges facing the industry. I talked about recruiting and retaining the very best people, because we need those very good people in the room. And that's why we talk relentlessly about the importance of investing in proving the value that we add, so we can recruit and retain even better people and keep them in the business. You also mentioned about having younger people in the room and having different perspectives. And at this point, I feel the need to distance myself from you, Paul, because we're both 43, and you and I are not in the same bracket on this one, in the nicest way. But one of the things we do in the UK is we have a school outreach program. We try to get people in the industry who wouldn't otherwise consider coming into it. We have a program we run on behalf of the UK government to get people in the industry who don't have a degree. So they bring a different sort of perspective. We try and get people young people from basically poor backgrounds to join our industry. And the reason for that is we want the very best people regardless of background, but we also, if we're going to sell to the whole of society, if if we're going to communicate with the whole of society, we can't have just one very narrow view when we're taking decisions on what to advise. Because, yeah, people like us will get those decisions wrong because we don't have that broader perspective. And that's why it's important, I would say, in the UK and all around the world, that we have people in our industry who reflect society as a whole.
Спасибо огромное. Спасибо.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I actually have 18 more questions, but unfortunately our time is coming to an end. Are there any questions from the audience? Please take the microphone and ask your question. Please introduce yourself and address your question to a speaker. We have only 5 minutes left. Hello everyone, my name is Maria. My question is to all speakers because I'm interested in the opinions of different companies, of different generations, of different countries and markets. So at the moment, many people say that, you know, there's a big gap between generations. So what do you think about the priorities of companies and social responsibility when the new generation, Generation Z, comes on the market? I can just share my opinion. The problem of generations gap is not something that is discussed only now. You know, we have had this for ages. There is a novel written by great Russian writer Ivan Turgenev, Fathers and Sons. So this problem has always been there. I can say that there might be only a gap between the competencies, and I mean digital competencies. The Generation Z and young people that were born, so to say, with a chip in their head. So they grew up in a completely different environment, completely different system of education. You know, they have much faster access to information, and it's very different from my generation or my parents that are 80 now. So the only gap that I see is the gap in digital technologies. So those professions that are related to PR and marketing and communication, they're very dramatic. You know, young people become more successful on those markets where digital technologies create 99% of success. We can speak about artificial intelligence and technological process and automation and other things. But anyway, I think that young people shouldn't be afraid of anything. They shouldn't worry that, you know, they won't find a job. I think there is an ocean of opportunities for you. But as to middle-aged people or older people, they must be helped. And young people should actually help them to improve their competences in digital technologies. And that's what we do in our university. Anybody wants to add anything? I can say that everything is great because we do learn from the older generation and the older generation learns from us. So we can, you know, exchange our experience and learn different things from each other.
This gap between generations, absolutely the case. And given our industry, so much of its growth is driven by digital, that's a really important thing for us as an industry. But I would also say that, as you say, there has always been a gap between generations. And I think all of us, at some point or other, when we were young, have been told that we have it far easier than our parents' generation. And now, as we get older, we reflect that view back. That's just the way of the world, isn't it?
Спасибо. Пожалуйста, вопрос.
Question? Hello, my question is for Paul. What do you think about artificial intelligence and the opportunities it brings to marketing? Because basically it enables a dialogue. So you basically can do ultra-targeting. So speaking about like 7 years from now or 10 years from now, would it affect marketing and PR communications, the artificial intelligence? What do you think about this digital transformation and its impact? Thank you.
Осталось?
It's a big question, but we have only 2 minutes left. The question is very broad.
I do think there are profound implications for our business in artificial intelligence and indeed in a lot of other technologies that are coming along, in virtual reality, for example. I think that artificial intelligence is something that we have to be both excited and cautious about. If it is harnessed properly, then it will help us in data gathering and in information dissemination in ways that will make public relations much more efficient. At the same time, we have to be aware that artificial intelligence, like almost everything else in the technological realm, suffers potentially, at least, from a garbage in, garbage out issue. So there are lots of issues about how you program artificial intelligence. And we've seen in recent years, for example, machine learning that quickly learns to turn machines into just as big an asshole as a human being can be. We've seen machines become racist because they learn how to be racist from the people who talk to them. And so we have to be careful about that. And I think the biggest thing for us to be thinking about right now is actually the ethical challenge of artificial intelligence and where the line between tailoring information to individual audiences and stealing data from those audiences is, and where the line between streamlining the communications program and losing control of the communications program is. And I think we have to be excited about it, but I think we have to be aware of all of the ethical challenges that it will present.
Спасибо огромное.
Thank you very much. So we should probably continue our discussion during our roundtables because we're going a coffee break at the moment and then we'll continue our discussion. I just wanted to sum up. First of all, there's a demand for truth. We cannot be insincere, we should not be hypocrite. The companies should share the values of their employees. The companies should not just be neutral. Hype is good, but you should be careful about it, and it all depends on the taste. So these were the key points that I noted, and I would like to thank you for your statements, for your comments, and see you later after the coffee break.